Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. This is City Talk. The United States is being Latinized. In 2002, Hispanics exceeded African Americans as the second largest ethnic or racial group in the United States. Latinos have elected mayors, state legislators, and governors. They are seen by both Republicans and Democrats as a pivotal vote. We've got A-Rod, we've got J-Lo, and Cinco de Mayo. Salsa is the beat. The Muzzio household also has been Latinized. My son-in-law is Puerto Rican. So is my adopted son. This shirt, a guayabera, my accent needs work, is what I got for Father's Day. Joining me today is best-selling author and award-winning journalist Jorge Ramos to talk about the Latino Wave, how Hispanics will elect the next American president. Mr. Ramos is the longtime anchor of Univision's premier news program, Noticiero. The Wall Street Journal has called him a key to a huge voting bloc. Welcome.
Great to be here.
The book is dedicated to the first Latino U.S. president, who surely has already been born. Pretty confident prediction. Explain.
I'm pretty convinced that the first Hispanic U.S. president has been born. Could be my son Nicholas, who's 6 years old, or his friends, or could be Bill Richardson Lopez, the governor of New Mexico, or if you believe the Republicans, could be George P. Bush, the nephew of President George W.
Evidence.
Bush.
Convince me.
Well, right now there are 40 million Latinos. In 50 years from now, there will be 100 million Latinos. And in 120 years from now, and I'm sorry to say that neither you or I are going to be here, but there will be more Hispanics than non-Hispanic whites in the United States. In other words, the United States will have a Hispanic majority. What is happening right now in cities like Miami or in states like California will be exactly what's going to happen with the rest of the United States in the future. So not only are Latinos right now the largest minority, but eventually they'll be the majority in the whole country. What does that mean? Does it mean that this will be a bilingual country? Maybe in some states they'll be completely bilingual. Does it mean that Latinos want to take over? No. Does it mean that Latinos want to create a nation within a nation? I don't think so. Latinos are assimilating very fast politically and economically. However, the sheer numbers are telling us that we are living through an incredible, truly an incredible demographic revolution.
Okay, now, the argument essentially is that demographics is political destiny, that simply by force of numbers, whether immigration or natural increase birth rates, that Hispanics are going to be the majority and then ultimately the majority of voters, and therefore we're going to elect a Latino president.
Has to do with numbers.
Okay.
It has to do first with immigration. Every single day, 1,000 undocumented immigrants cross the border illegally. Every year, more than 1 million legal immigrants come to this country. And also, Latinos tend to have a very high birth rate. Latinos tend to have more kids per family, about 3, than the rest of the population. So if you put together immigrants and the Latinos that are being born in the United States, that are U.S. citizens, then you can understand what's going on truly demographically.
Okay, but as Latinos, as other groups move up the socioeconomic ladder, they tend to have fewer children, so your demographic projections may take a little bit longer, but you're saying no matter what, it's inexorable.
It doesn't matter, even if something would happen and the army would be sent to the border, just by the sheer number of Latinos living already in states like New York, Illinois, Florida, Texas, and California, we will see a truly transformation, and we are seeing it right now. We call it the process of Latinization, or La Ola Latina, the Latino Wave. Okay, now, Reconquista. Reconquering? I don't think so. We have to remember that in 1848,
I mean,
in 1848, for those who don't know, in 1848, Mexico lost half of its territory to the United States. I haven't heard a single Mexican politician who wants the territory back.
Oh, no, not literally, of course.
Of course. We can talk about the reconquest, or many people might want to talk about it. Not politically, not economically, but culturally.
Right.
What does it mean? Exactly what you were talking in the introduction. More tortillas are being sold than bagels, more salsa than ketchup, and I have the numbers to prove it in the book.
Absolutely.
It's not only J-Lo and A-Rod, but also the Spanish is being spoken in every single corner of the United States. President Bill Clinton used to say that he wanted to be the last U.S. president who didn't speak Spanish, and he was right. George W. Bush is the first U.S. president who speaks Spanish, or should I say, the first U.S. president who thinks that he speaks Spanish. And to be perfectly neutral in this election year, I also have to say I spoke with John Kerry, and he could also be the master of the 7 words in Spanish, meaning Viva Mexico, Viva Puerto Rico, Viva Cuba Libre. So I think in this election year, they have to go beyond just saying a few words in Spanish.
Right.
But going back to the main idea, this country is being transformed by Latinos. It's not a political reconquest, but it is truly the fact that Latinos are having an incredible cultural impact on everything in the United States.
Okay, in your book, you talk about the Hispanic double identity. Describe that double identity. In fact, you've lived a double identity.
W.E.B. Du Bois, one of the greatest African-American thinkers, he used to talk about double consciousness in the African-American community. By that, he meant that African-Americans would identify themselves first as seeing through their own eyes and through other people's eyes. Something similar happens with the Hispanic community. We are identified, if you ask any Latino, if you ask me to identify myself, I would say, well, I'm Mexican first. And then if you press me a little bit more, I would say, I'm Hispanic or Latino. And later on, I might say that I am an American. So we have this double identity. Latinos are different from other groups of immigrants. The process of complete assimilation, I don't think is going to happen with Latinos. The melting pot ran out of steam with Latinos.
Okay, now you're saying that not only has the melting pot run out of steam, but in a sense, it ought to have run out of steam. There is a sort of a normative element to what I'm reading in this book.
And many people, of course, are saying, how come Latinos do not want to assimilate to this country? I think there's an incredible process of political and economic integration. We are seeing second-generation Latinos who feel more comfortable in English than in Spanish. Third-generation Latinos tend to marry outside the Hispanic community. They had enough of us. 4 million Hispanics are in the process of becoming U.S. citizens. So, of course, we are in the process of Latinizing the United States, but at the same time, Latinos are being Americanized. In other words, we are seeing a process of mutual transformation.
How is the Latino immigration different from the immigration of my grandparents, the Italian immigration or the Jewish immigration or the Irish and German before it? What are the elements? Is it the culture itself, or is it exogenous factors, external factors?
It is very different to be an Italian immigrant living in New York in 1910 and wanted to visit your family or your girlfriend in Sicily and having to wait for a boat to take you there, than being Isabel, who crossed the border yesterday from Tijuana to San Diego, or being a Cuban American who's been living for 4 years in Florida, and being able to be connected to your country of origin. The difference between other waves of immigration and Latino immigrants is that we are still connected to our country of origin. There's the element of proximity. Mexico is right here.
Right.
Cuba, Puerto Rico. But also is the fact that we are connected through the internet, that we are connected through cell phones, that we are sending every year $30 billion in monies to our countries. So we are still connected. And that is the main difference between us and other immigrants. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that probably, again, Latinos don't want to take over, do not want to create a nation within a nation, but maybe Latinos are creating their own space here in the United States, and that is making things completely different than other groups.
Yeah, and that runs into a strain of opposition signaled by, for example, Samuel Huntington's analysis in Who Are We, where he actually goes after particularly Mexican immigrants and looks at the immigrant cultures and finds that they are destructive of quote-unquote American culture. And in a sense, your book is a reply or a challenge to Huntington.
Absolutely. Huntington is wrong when he says that Latinos are a threat to the integrity of the United States. We are part of the United States. Latinos just want to be accepted and recognized as an important part of the United States. I was, for those who question the loyalty and patriotism of Latinos, let me just tell you, I spent 3 weeks last year in Iraq and Kuwait, and I met many Latino immigrants who were fighting for this country. I remember meeting Diana Gonzalez from Jalisco, Mexico, 19 years old, just a U.S. resident, not a U.S. citizen. And when I asked her why she became part of the U.S. Army, she told me that after 9/11, she wanted to defend this country. Cindy Segovia, 26, from Monterrey, Mexico. She was in the process of becoming a U.S. citizen before she was sent to Kosovo. Then she was sent to Iraq. And when I asked her if she was willing to die for this country, she told me, yes, absolutely. And Diana and Cindy, they are not U.S. citizens. They are U.S. residents, and they're willing to die for this country. So if you put this together with the fact that Latinos, and especially Latin American immigrants, are learning English at a very fast pace, getting better salaries, getting better education, I don't know how can Huntington say that we are not assimilating fast enough and that we are not part of the United States.
Okay, let's move off that and let's go to politics. In your first chapter, you argue that Latinos elected George Bush.
They did.
The Latino vote put George Bush into the White House. Now, lots of groups could claim that they put George Bush into the White House, but you make a substantial case that the Bush campaign made a much more concerted, directed effort to appeal to Latinos. Describe it.
It's not only my argument, it's also what George Bush believes.
Okay.
I had the opportunity to talk with President George W. Bush in the year 2001. And when I asked him if he believed that the Cuban American community had decided the Florida election, he told me yes. And then he added in Spanish, y no los voy a olvidar, and I won't forget them. What happened? He believes that 537 votes that gave him the victory in Florida were Cuban American votes. And also, we have to take into consideration that during the last days of the campaign in the year 2000, Al Gore made a huge mistake. He thought he was going to lose Florida because of the Leon Gonzalez factor. Leon Gonzalez, of course, was the little boy, 5 years old, who was rescued at sea. And the Clinton administration, at the end, decided to send him back to Cuba. Al Gore, for some reason, did not distance himself from President Clinton. And at the end, the Democratic Party and Al Gore believed that they had lost Florida and decided not to campaign more in Florida. But not only that, they decided not to spend a single dollar in Spanish language television at the end of the campaign. Republicans spent thousands and thousands of dollars in that, and at the end, George W. Bush won by 537 votes.
Okay.
So it is Bush who believes that.
Assuming that in some way that is the case, what did Latinos get from a Bush victory? Did they get what they wanted in terms of a Latino agenda, or are they being taken for granted again?
Cuban Americans, remember Bush said that, y no los voy a olvidar, and I won't forget them. And for the Cuban American community, that has been right. President Bush has been supporting the embargo against Cuba, and not only that, just recently, he strengthened the embargo by limiting the number of trips and monies that can be sent to the island. So in that sense, President Bush has kept his word with the Cuban American community.
Right.
Now, in this 2004, Latino voters are much more sophisticated. We need more than just a few words in Spanish and just more than a few promises. We have to go beyond what we call sombrero and taco politics. And both John Kerry and President Bush, they have to address the specific concerns of the Hispanic community.
Are they?
Which are, first, a misperception is that all Latinos are immigrants and that we only care about Cuba and undocumented immigrants. No, poll after poll shows that the three most important issues are jobs, education, and healthcare. Exactly the same thing as the rest of the population. Why jobs? Because in the last 3 years, 300,000 Hispanics have lost their job. Education, we have a tragedy within the Hispanic community. 1 in every 3 students do not finish high school. And healthcare, 6 out of 10 Hispanic families do not have insurance. So those are the issues most important for Latinos.
And those are the issues I do polling for the Hispanic Federation have done for a dozen years. Those are the 3 top issues in the 2004 poll. They were the top issues in the previous poll. It's an American agenda, isn't it? It's part of an American agenda. Yeah. Now, what are your expectations in terms of this agenda being delivered? And in part, the question is, what is the Hispanic vote going to be like? Because you don't get anything unless you provide the vote. If you look at the states, let's just look at the Electoral College. You've got California, New York, Illinois,
They'll go for
Florida, Texas. 75% of Latinos live in those 5 states. Out of those 5 states, 4 of them are out of play. Only Florida is in play. So how are Latinos going to influence the election? What other states can they be pivotal?
Traditionally, Latinos tend to vote more for the Democratic Party than for the Republican Party, about 70% for the Democrats and 30% for the Republicans. The argument is as follows. The country is completely divided politically between Bush and Kerry. You've seen the polls.
Sure.
lately. The country is polarized by the war. Every single day we see in every newspaper that the country is divided by the war. So we're going to have 8 million Hispanic voters going to the polls on November the 2nd. These 8 million Hispanic voters are concentrated in 10 states, among them the ones you mentioned, but also 5 battleground states: Florida, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Nevada. Maybe we could add Oregon, but who knows. These Hispanic voters concentrated in these 5 battleground states will have the final word. Since 1960, every candidate who wins 2 out of these 3 states, California, Texas, and Florida, will win the White House. So again, California will go for Kerry, Texas for Bush, and maybe Florida again will decide the election. The challenges for both candidates is completely different. For Bush, since Ronald Reagan, every single Republican candidate who gets more than 30% of the Hispanic vote wins the White House. And if Bush gets more than 30% of the Hispanic vote, it is probable that he might be reelected.
So there's almost this 30% solution as
for the Republicans.
For the Republicans.
The challenge for John Kerry is monumental, because Al Gore got 67% of the Hispanic vote in the year 2000, and it was not enough. So John Kerry needs to get at least 70% of the Hispanic vote to truly win the White House. Can he get it? Can he deliver? Who knows? We'll find out. Both candidates are trying to woo the Hispanic vote in any way they want. They are spending much more money this year than 4 years ago, and they are at least addressing 2 very important issues: immigration and Cuba.
Let's talk about the immigration issue and George Bush's, to go back to my earlier question, sort of George Bush's service to the Latino community since his election. Where do Latinos stand on this immigration issue, and where do the 2 major candidates stand on Latinos' concerns about immigration?
We're very different as a community, very diverse, but we do agree on certain things: on immigration, on education, on the importance of jobs and education in this country. The majority of Latinos would support an amnesty or a legalization program for 9 to 10 million undocumented immigrants living in this country, the majority of the Latinos. We can agree on that. But if you ask Kerry or Bush to say the word amnesty, they will refuse. They don't even want to say the word amnesty. They forget that Ronald Reagan in 1986 provided an amnesty for more than 3 million undocumented immigrants.
But he had won his second term by 1986. So it is possible for a George Bush in a second term. Go ahead, I'm sorry for the interruption.
But it's perfectly, because what we have right now is that both candidates are making very concrete proposals on immigration. President Bush has proposed a guest worker program that would provide legalization temporarily for millions of undocumented immigrants. They might get a renewal of 3 more years, but then President Bush expects that these immigrants will go back to their country of origin. That isn't going to happen. That's why only 45% of Latinos support President Bush's proposal. John Kerry, on the other hand, is proposing a legalization program for those who have been working in this country for more than 5 years, who've been paying taxes, and who have not committed crimes. This proposal has a lot of support within the Hispanic community, but guess what? Has no support whatsoever in Congress. So those are the differences. Something that could be done that has no support in the Hispanic community, and something that might not be done and might not get the votes, but is completely supported by the Hispanic community.
One of the pieces of data that was very interesting from the Hispanic Federation poll of New York Latinos and New Jersey Latinos, and also national polling, is that increasingly Latinos are looking at the war in Iraq as a mistake, and that it is a mistake on several levels, and that it is hurting the United States domestically and particularly economically. Bush is not doing well with Latinos either on his handling of Iraq and national security or the economy.
Latinos tend to be more skeptical about the war than the rest of the population. Less than half of all Latinos supported the war before it started. And right now, less than half of all Latinos are supporting the war because 2 reasons. First, there's the perception that a disproportionately high number of Latinos have died in Iraq. Latinos are only 9% of all the members of the armed forces, 9%. However, 18% of the deaths during the first 2 months of combat were Latinos. So there's the perception that more Latinos are dying than other groups. The second element has to do with the fact that Latinos, because of Spanish language media, have been exposed to anti-American and anti-war information coming from Latin America.
Okay.
So we have had a more balanced argument and arguments and information on the war than other groups in this country. So because of this idea that Latinos have died in high numbers in Iraq, and because we have been exposed to this information, Latinos tend to say no to war.
Let's talk about the
They're supporting the troops. Let me tell you something. Once 30,000 Latinos have been fighting in Iraq. Once the troops are in Iraq, they're supporting the troops, but they are not for the war.
You mentioned the impact of Spanish language media in giving Latinos an alternative perspective or a supplemented perspective on the war in Iraq. Turning to the Latino media, Univision is now the 5th largest network, and I looked at your ratings. You beat the networks in a number of major markets, in Miami,
Houston, Los
Angeles.
We're fighting for number 2 and number 3 in New York.
Explain the impact of Latino media, because as you note in the book, a personal anecdote was that when you got interviewed for a job, they said that your accent was a little bit too much, and that on top of that, the Latino media were going to die. You're here 18 years later, and this individual is long gone. Talk a bit about the rise and the prominence of Latino media, particularly TV, but not only TV.
Well, when I arrived in 1983, a news director in Los Angeles told me that I would never work in this country because he said I had a very thick accent in English, and he was right about it. But also he said he believed that all Latinos were going to assimilate so fast that Spanish language media was going to disappear. 20 years later, he lost his job and I got mine. When I started working in Spanish language media in Los Angeles, it was very difficult to find anyone in the city hall who would speak Spanish.
So you covered local city hall politics. That's where you
I've
started.
always been a reporter.
You're a reporter, even though you're most known as an anchor, as I told you off camera.
Yeah, but I still feel as a reporter.
My son said, I saw the picture and he said, Jorge Ramos.
Well, before I had gray hair, probably. Yeah, I've been doing that for
Go
almost
ahead,
20
I'm
years.
sorry.
No, but so what happened is that it was so difficult to find someone who would speak Spanish. They would tell us, oh, I know someone who speaks Spanish, my driver or my gardener. Nowadays, we have both political parties calling us almost on a daily basis, bombarding us with information and videos, trying to get access to Spanish language media. So it's a completely different story. And not only that, many English language newscasts complain constantly that they are losing the ratings battles against Spanish language media. And it is happening in all these cities. But I think it's not only the sheer numbers of people who speak Spanish, also those who are bilingual. Nowadays, about 50% of all those who are bilingual in this country prefer to get their news in Spanish than in English. Why? I think we're doing something right. I think we're providing a wider spectrum on news. If you want to know what's going on about the recall election in Venezuela, believe me, if you tune into ABC, NBC, CBS, or CNN or Fox News Today, you won't find anything on that.
Okay. 2004 election, though, is a pivot.
It is.
Where does the Latino political agenda move from 2004? What project out to your first Latino president?
We have to make sure that the promises of George Bush and John Kerry will be kept after November the 2nd. That's one of the most important things. But I tend to talk about the Christopher Columbus syndrome, that we are being rediscovered every 4 years, and then politicians forget about us. I don't think it's going to happen anymore because of the sheer numbers of Latinos living in this country. We are underrepresented politically, but this is changing. About a third of all Latinos are under 18 years of age. A third of all Latinos are not U.S. citizens. But when all these teenagers and children become 18, or when all these U.S. residents become U.S. citizens, the political impact of Latinos will be incredible. The party that controls the Hispanic vote will dominate American politics.
You talk in the book about Latino leaders or lack thereof, national leaders.
We don't have a Jesse Jackson, an equivalent.
Do Latinos need a Jesse Jackson or
We need like 20.
You need 20. Who are these leaders? Where do you see the individuals or groups that will mobilize Latinos to participate in the political system, electorally and otherwise?
Latinos are so diverse that it is almost impossible to find one national leader. As a matter of fact, we don't have one national leader. We have many national leaders. And you'll find them in different communities. You'll find in the Cuban American community, Jorge Mascanosa Jr. and Jorge Mascanosa Sr. You'll find Bill Richardson Lopez, the governor of New Mexico. Mostly the members of Congress have become these leaders that we actually do need in many different communities. So we don't have one single leader. We have many different leaders, and that's exactly what we need at this point. Not just one. One is not enough. But we don't have, for instance, one senator. We don't have a judge in the Supreme Court, and that has to change. I mean, it is incredible that we are 14% of the population, and we don't have a single senator.
Is that just simply a question of demographics and citizenship, and that will change?
They'll change in a few decades. Again, 18%. Less than about 1/3 of all Latinos are under 18 years of age. Another third of Latinos are not U.S. citizens yet.
So
when that changes, and it's changing very fast, no candidate will be able to get to the White House without a significant support of the Hispanic community. There are places where if you do not speak Spanish nowadays in Florida, Texas, and California, you won't be elected.
And New York.
That's also, of course, a factor here.
This has been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Gracias.
Will you be back after the election to talk about what happened?
And we'll see if I was right.
You're invited.
We'll see if Latinos will decide this election. Thank you.
I hope to have you back.
Thank you so much.